Hi guys, it's Miss Levy. Here we are at the Chapter 3 review. We're at Part 1, starting with Kiyoshi 1, so please find this in your notes. This is Kiyoshi 1. This is why migrants move and the characteristics of migrants. Let's start with some basic background information, some definitions. So we're talking about net migration. So this is, when you look at net migration, this is a very specific type of relocation diffusion. When we look at emigration with an E, emigration is migration from a location. Immigration is migration to a location. And an immigrant is, a person is both an immigrant and an immigrant at the same time. They're immigrating away from their country and immigrating to another country. The difference between the number of immigrants and the number of emigrants is the net migration for a country. So they take the number of people who are coming subtracts people who are leaving, and that's the net migration. If they have more people coming than going, then they have net in migration. If they have more people leaving than coming, they have net out migration. Let's start here with Ravenstein's laws of migration. So Ravenstein, he had a series of laws of migration. He's a British sociologist, and one was that most migrants go only a short distance. That long-distance migrants, they favor big city destinations. In other words, people will travel farther if they're migrating to a city or if they're migrating internationally. Most migration proceeds step by step, meaning that person who's migrating from Guatemala, they'll migrate from Guatemala to maybe another country in Central America, and then they'll migrate into southern Mexico, then maybe into central Mexico, and then into northern Mexico, and then eventually into maybe the United States, in the southwestern part of the United States, and then maybe if they're traveling to Iowa, they'll go into New Mexico, then into Colorado. Next in Ravenstein's laws is that most migration is rural to urban, meaning that vast majority of migration throughout the world is this rural to urban migration, people moving from the farms to more clustered settlements. As they develop economically, they need less farmers and they need more people because they have machines, more commercial agriculture, and they have more jobs available in clustered settlements. And that's throughout the world. What you see mainly in LDCs, DCs. We know from 3.4 that the most common intra-regional migration pattern in MDCs is the urban to suburban. Next, each migration flow produces what they call a counterflow, means that when people migrate, some will return because of the culture differences, or the push factors are more realistic. They're more typically, because people are living those push factors, they tend to be more true. Whereas the pull factors it's a dream. It's what you believe about a place. So people believe these streets are lined with gold in the United States, which we all know is not true. So some will migrate. It won't be as good as they thought it was going to be, so some will return. They call that counterflow or counter migration. Next, most migrants are adults. Families are less likely to make international moves. So the most common migrant is a young single man without family. That's the most common migrant. Next, let's talk about push and pull factors. People decide to migrate because of push factors and pull factors. A push factor induces a person to move out of their present location. That's what the reasons why people want to leave a place. Pull factors are those that are what are appealing about a new place. That's what they like about a new place. Both push and pull factors work simultaneously to play a role in human migration. The reasons why people migrate are both push and pull. Like I said, though, from the previous slide, the push factors, those reasons why they want to leave a place, are typically more realistic, more true than the pull factors, are what are appealing about a new place, because you're living that push factor while you're dreaming about the pull factor. Let's talk about these three types of push-pull factors. We can identify three major kinds of push and pull factors. We have economic, cultural. Political's in that cultural element, but you'll sometimes see them combined, political and cultural, and sometimes separated. So economic, political / cultural, and environmental. We know that economic is the #1 reason why people migrate. So jobs or high, push factor would be not enough jobs. Pull factor would be more available jobs. Economic would be not enough high-paying jobs. Pull factor would be a lot of high-paying jobs. Cultural would be like a religious persecution, ethnic persecution, feeling like they aren't accepted. That would be push factor. Pull factor would be religious or cultural or ethnic or gender preference and such. This would be all pull factors. Political would be if there's a political persecution, a political civil war, political unrest would all be push factors. Political freedom, political stability, those are all pull factors. Environmental, #1 reason why people want to leave the north and northeast in the United States is because of the weather, the climate. So it's colder, more harsh climate. They move to the south, the Sun Belt, because it's more warm, tropical climate. So those are environmental reasons. Next, let's talk about refugees and what refugees are. So please find this. This is, let's talk about what a refugee is. Refugee is a person who flees or is displaced or is forced to leave his or her home country. So remember, a refugee is a person who crosses international borders. So a person who flees for his life because of fear of safety. They have to leave their home country. They travel internationally. That's a refugee. The reason why they migrate, let's talk about political, social, and environmental reasons why they migrate. Political reason would be that they fear for their life during civil conflict, political persecution, political imprisonment, what you see in a country like North Korea, or even places like China, even Iran, Saudi Arabia. If they speak out against the government, Russia, if they speak out, criticize the government, if they're calling for freedom of press, then they can face political imprisonment. That's a reason to flee a country. Next would be if the government forcibly removes, evicts the person from their homeland. So that could be a refugee as well, is that the government truly evicts the person. This is very rare that this actually happens, but because typically there would be an imprisonment situation. So next is social reasons why they migrate. This would be like religious persecution. Social typically relates to, social is typically an ethnic or cultural reasons. So this would be religious persecution, ethnic or racial persecution, like a genocide. This is happening in Africa. This is the situation in Syria. Rights or opportunities are being denied based on gender or sexuality. Those are all social or cultural reasons why they're migrating. And last would be environmental reasons. The country scale, let's say if they have a natural disaster that's on a mass scale, like you see in some of the sub-Saharan African countries where there's such a massive drought, or there's a tsunami, or there's widespread flooding. Pollution or human-caused disaster might cause it be a reason why there's an environmental reason for people to flee their homeland. Maybe like Chernobyl or the Fukushima disaster, if there was a nuclear disaster. If there's some kind of epidemic like a disease like Ebola spreading through the country, would be a reason for people to flee for their safety. Remember, a refugee is somebody who's leaving the country because they're fleeing for their safety. Or maybe food insecurity or famine, like in Ethiopia. There's a major reason why there's in Chad, a reason why there's so many refugees. Continent of Africa is the continent that has the largest number of refugees. So you can see this as we look at continent of Africa. This is where we see the largest numbers of refugees here. We see this especially if you have a civil war. Civil war is a major reason why you have conflict, and you can see that civil war is the reason why you have major amounts of refugees, and you can see that refugees, they spill over into the country that's nearest to them where it's safe for them. So like Sudan, there was a war in Sudan, a government conflict between the government forces and different militia there, Muslim versus non-Muslim. This caused people to flee out of their home. You see this in Democratic Republic of Congo. Again, this is war between the government and the different militia that are local there. You can see where it's spilling over into the countries: Tanzania, Rwanda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Gabon, Congo Republic. You see this here with Turkey, lots of refugees coming out of Turkey as they're having political unrest. Afghanistan here, from the war in Afghanistan, you'd see a lot of refugees coming out of Afghanistan, out of Myanmar because of the war there in Myanmar. You see out of Colombia, they had a lot of refugees. Now there are a lot of refugees coming out of Venezuela, a lot of refugees coming out of Guatemala, El Salvador, trying to come to the United States. And refugees do have an economic impact upon the countries. So refugees, so let's say those that are going over into Chad or into Ethiopia or from into Jordan, from Sudan, or those that are leaving Democratic Republic of the Congo and going over to Rwanda, Tanzania, over to Zambia, Zimbabwe, Gabon, Cameroon, the people leaving Afghanistan and going into Turkmenistan, going into Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan. These people have effects on the local economy because once they get to another country, that country or the United Nations has to provide for them. So this can add to the available low-wage labor pool if the people are in a position to be able to work. Then there are more low-skilled, low-pay people willing to perform low-skilled, low-pay jobs. This creates competition for a limited number of jobs for the area. The biggest impact is that it becomes an additional cost on those destination countries because those countries now, that receiving country, like Ethiopia here, Tanzania here, they have to provide for those refugees housing, food, education, health care costs. So it may result in higher taxes for the people who live in these receiving the destination countries because those people now have to pay for them. This can create an increased demand for goods and services because there's now an substantial increase in the population. It can put an increased strain on the natural resources like water and energy and forest supplies as they have to again sustain a much larger population that is an influx, a quick influx. It's not like these people, it took a long time for them to get there. This is a quick influx. These refugee camps, because typically they set up refugee camps just across the border. The refugee camps can be financially dependent upon that receiving country. This was a big deal with the refugees coming from Sudan and set up into Chad. Chad had hundreds of thousands of people who had fled Sudan and come into Chad to the refugee camps, and they were financially dependent upon the government of Chad to provide for them. Also can pose security threats because now you have this war spilling over as the war spills over into the refugee camps potentially. This can create conflicts within that country. And there can be the benefit of now you have more cultural diversity, so the refugees may provide skills and knowledge. Like some doctors that came from Iraq whenever there was the war in Iraq between the United States and the government of the United States and the former government under Saddam Hussein. Those doctors that fled Iraq, they went into places like Pakistan or into other surrounding countries, and they worked there. So there can be that benefit of is that a lot of the people who are fleeing are the people who are not involved in the war. They're not part of the military. So you have your doctors, lawyers, teachers, dentists, architects, your skilled people who are able to go or fleeing there and go into other countries and provide for skilled labor force in those countries as well. In the next, we'll talk about the next section of this key issue.